World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland has concluded. Overcrowding, late registration and long queues were some of the sticking points that stood out as more than 13 million learners returned to the classroom on the first day of the 2024 school year. Meanwhile, Matric class of 2023 achieved an 82.9% pass rate. We also look at the knock-on effects of Russia diamond ban that kicked in at the start of January. A very good afternoon. If you've just joined us, we're coming to you live from our studios here in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Welcome to Week in Review. Now, this is the program where we review some of the biggest stories to come out of the week. I'm your host, Mfundo Mabala. Now, leading our bulletin this hour, the political party Rise Mzansi is launching its election manifesto in Tshwane. The launch comes 9 months after the party was formed. Our reporter Natasha Piri is at the launch and joins us now with the very latest. Good afternoon, Natasha. What a speech by Songezo. He firstly echoed the sentiments of many that 2024 is indeed their 1994, where many would say they are now to usher in this new dispensation of sorts. Talk to us about his address.
Well, definitely, Mfuna. And I think what's also interesting about this very manifesto, and the reason why they call it a people's manifesto, is because Rise Mzansi has been on the ground, going throughout communities, soliciting their views, what the people want to actually see change in South Africa. And hence, we saw the culmination there of the People's Convention that took place last year in October. Then they had the People's Declaration, of course, which then culminated in this very People's Manifesto that we spoke, that we're actually covering. A lot was said about economic reform, especially around land, but of course a huge focus on young people, especially children as well. A lot of interventions around training, Mfundo, and of course a lot of focus around ending poverty. But let's just talk to Makashule Galos, one of the leaders of the party, the chief organizer, and of course get his views, and then shortly after we'll get the ordinary members' views, what they thought of the speech, and did he actually speak to their needs. Makashule, thank you so much for joining us at SABC News. Your overall impressions, of course, we spoke to you yesterday, and what you said yesterday actually was reflected today.
Thanks very much, Natasha. Thanks very much to everyone that came to this People's Manifesto, and everyone who tuned in to watch on SABC. We are very thankful that people were tuned in, people stayed in when Songezo was delivering the speech, and I'm quite happy as a chief organizer that the turnout was as we had planned. We had over 4,000 people that were in the hall. They stayed. No one walked out when the leader was speaking. Everyone was listening attentively. So I'm happy. I'm also happy that the priority areas of economy, safety, the issue of immigration, the issue of climate change were touched in the speech that Songezo Zibi delivered this afternoon.
Listen, good on paper, good policies, some may say, but the proof is in the pudding. The people of South Africa, the 26.8 million voters who are registered on the voters roll, still have to decide whether Rise Mzansi is a party for them. Yes, yesterday you said that you're quite confident that you will be represented in the various legislatures in the National Assembly, but those South Africans who are watching you right now on television need to be convinced.
So our leader, Songezo Zibi, has given us a line of march. He said all of us, including the volunteers you see around me here, that now the manifesto has been launched. Now we need to take it to our communities. We need to knock on every door to ensure that we gain the trust of South Africans. The work does not end today. The work continues from today, and we have the manifesto. We have the leaders. Now campaign is full on. We are going to knock on doors so that whichever date that the president announces will find us ready. Even if he was to say that next week Wednesday there's going to be an election, the volunteers, the organizers that you see around me, they are ready to ensure that Rise Mzansi goes to Parliament, to ensure that Rise Mzansi goes to the provincial legislatures.
Makashule, let's take this conversation to the various volunteers. Like they say, what Songezo had to say. As a volunteer of Rise Mzansi, what are you going to do in your community now?
Democracy. We will fight.
Okay, Abuti, when as a volunteer, you heard what your leader had to say as a volunteer of Rise Mzansi. Like Makashule Ghana had to say, the work starts now. What are you going to do as a volunteer?
Make sure in my community we finish crime and help the young students for doing their homework here and empower the youth.
And which community do you come from?
Katlong, S6 is 2 pin.
Okay, another volunteer who's willing to speak to us, Buti Wena. Hello, Sisi.
Yebo.
Uzwile ukuthi batheni ngaphakathi angithi wena as a volunteer Rise Mzansi, what is your responsibility going to be?
I-responsibility yami ukuthi njengoba shilo ukuthi as bazo-train ama-caregiver sihambe siyosiza labo gogo labo abadinga usizo and sisize umphakathi wethu i-poverty iphele emphakathini even ne-crime and which nale education ukuthi like if must fall mele iphele mele like yena uza nama bazari uzela nama scholarship so nje yizi izinto ezimele siziyele emphakathini sobatshela ukuthi usongeza uthe uyasithembisa uyasideliver zonke lezi zinto ngiyabona.
But I see you're a young person. Have you registered to vote?
No, yeah, not yet, but at 3 I am voting. At 3,
the 3rd and the 4th of November.
Yes, ngizovotela i-Rise Mzansi.
Okay. You, sir, as a volunteer of Rise, you heard what they said, a lot of priority around economic justice, economic reforms. What is your key takeaway and what will you be doing in your community as a Rise volunteer?
Yes, it was a great conference. I was so excited. So many young people here. There's still hope for the country, regardless of all the injustice and the things that are happening. The key takeaway is going to take business and young people to really bring forth the change in the country now and tomorrow. So as a person going back to my community, it's all about education, having those conversations. I am voting, but let me sit down and have a conversation with other young people and understand where they are and share the importance of voting. But more importantly, to vote for Rise Mzansi.
Okay. Sir, I see you're shaking your head behind. For Natasha from Mfundo who's watching you right now, who says, but I'm unemployed, I have no job. Why should Rise Mzansi be the political party for me? Yes, you're talking about land, you're talking about jobs, you're talking about training me as a young people, but tangibly, Rise Mzansi has done nothing for me.
Well, majority of people don't even know the party, right? I would say they should give it a try, right? Look at the policy.
But why?
Well, because look at what they said in the manifesto, right? And like where they're going to come up with training platforms for young people after they finish school. Majority of the time, people, they leave school, there's no jobs, right? And after that, they don't know what to do. People fall into drugs, as he said. People fall into alcohol and all that stuff. So I would say training after school, like job opportunities that they can create. Most importantly, it's training. We can't get a job without a skill. So it's the most important thing. I would say that young people should look into Rise Mzansi.
Okay. And lastly, sir, how are you as a Rise volunteer going to empower your community and make sure that the community that you're from actually votes for the party?
Well,
I'll hold the mic.
Okay. Well, it's all about the word of mouth. It's all about going out there. We've heard what we wanted to hear here. In fact, we've always heard that Rise Mzansi is more about leadership, good ethical leadership. So currently, as South Africa, we are really struggling with bad leadership in our communities everywhere. And our community is not growing just because we don't have reasonable leaders that are able to make sure that they make changes and to improve people's lives for the better. So mine as a volunteer now is just, like I said, to spread a word of mouth and tell people that we rise together, we move together, and we've got to make this South Africa a better country for all of us to live in. They must all vote for Rise Mzansi. I will be just saying, let the struggle continue.
Thank you so much, good sir. Well, Mfundo, you've heard it here, not only from Makashule Ghana, who is the chief organizer of the party, but of course from, volunteers of Rise Mzansi. Some saying that the work starts now. They've been given their marching orders. Theirs is to go into the communities, implement the policies of the party, and theirs is to convince those who are on the voters' roll to come out in their numbers on election day. It's not so clear when elections will be in Mfundo, but of course also to rally those who haven't registered to vote to come out in their numbers on the 3rd and on the 4th of February to go register and vote. With that said, it's back to you in studio.
Natasha, just before I let you go, it's quite interesting for us to see you engaging with a lot of young people. Can you just break down the data for us? Was it a majority of young people who were in attendance there, or it was more of a mix?
Well, Mfundo, you're quite right. A lot of young people actually were actually in majority. I think from what I saw, I could, honestly say 90% of the volunteers and supporters that came here at the Heartfelt Arena here in Tshwane were actually young people. Even before the manifesto launch, even started, we spoke to young people. So a lot of young people seemingly taking interest in their party, and just also going through his manifesto speech, you see the interventions that Mr. Zibi actually mentions about young people, ECDs, a lot of talk about training young people. Yes, it's all good and well that young people matriculate, but the thing is, young people in our country actually need skills, Mfundo. Young people in our country actually need jobs. So much, a chunk of his speech was also centered around that. And of course, like you've correctly cited, a lot of young people actually came out in their numbers here in Tshwane.
Natasha, for that reportage. That's our reporter Natasha Piri out in Tshwane for us this afternoon. Still on politics, SABC News reporter Katla Khonyoni earlier spoke to ANC Secretary General, that's Fikile Mbalula, about the expected visitation of former President Jacob Zuma in Malamulele, Limpopo. Now, Mbalula says the ANC-NEC is expected to meet and clarify the former president's standing with the party in relation to its constitution.
Former President Zuma has got the right to be everywhere, wherever he wants, in terms of his party and his direction that he has taken. So I think the ANC, in terms of his standing, will reflect on that and take a decision. Because he says he's still a member of the party and all of that. We've got to address ourselves to that as an organization. That's all. Otherwise, from a point of view of party affiliation and membership, it's quite clear that he decided to leave, and he has left, and he supports a different party other than the ANC.
When can we expect a full-on decision by the NEC? Because it is the statement rather that they made, that the president made, that he is still a member of the ANC, but that he is campaigning for the MK. When will the public get a clear, straight answer? And what is the ANC? How is the ANC rather going to handle this going forward?
I've said this on behalf of the ANC many times, that the ANC will pronounce on that, and I think whenever it meets in the NEC, it will deal with that, because it's not a matter that you need to leave it hanging on. When somebody says, if he left, and then he said, no, I'm leaving, I'm supporting MK party, it is a case closed. But when somebody says, I've left, but I'm still a member, I'm staying in this organization, and I'm not living wholly, and part of me is gone in terms of the vote, but I'm still a member. I mean, obviously the party will pronounce itself in relation to that. But for the fact that he's gone out and mobilizing against us and all of that, we'll meet on the ground in terms of rebutting the things that he says whenever it is necessary. There's no self-respecting party that spends time on the opposition when we are an incumbent. President Zuma was a president in this country. It's not like he was not. He governed, he led for a specific time, and therefore we can't be spending time on reflecting on him and all of that. Obviously distortions that are made will be rectified as we go on, but we are concerned about our agenda, what the ANC has committed to the people of this country, and that is what is important, and we are not going to allow ourselves to be diverted. The sooner the better. When the ANC meet, clarify his standing in the party in relation to its statutes, the constitution, and all of that, the better, which the NEC will do. We are done now with January 8, and then we will deal with that matter and lay it to rest. All what I said today is that we did nothing to President Zuma. We didn't expel him from the party. All the doors were open always for him to engage with us. He chose the path he has chosen. Only him and him alone can explain it.
Welcome back. Thank you very much for staying with us. Now, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa is in Uganda's capital, Kampala. This is for the summit of the non-aligned movement, a bloc comprising mostly of developing countries. International governance, human rights, and the Israel-Hamas war has been the major talking points at that gathering.
President Cyril Ramaphosa was among more than a dozen heads of state and government officials at the opening of the 19th Non-Aligned Movement Summit. The gathering in Uganda's capital, Kampala, was a convergence of 120 member nations not aligned to major international blocs.
It's a politically very robust movement that has espoused very progressive political, ideological adherences. They've been united on many issues, but more especially on the promotion of multilateralism.
Azerbaijan is the outgoing chair of the group, and its foreign minister looked back on its 4-year tenure at the helm.
It is worth to state that our chairmanship in NAM coincided with COVID-19 outbreak. Azerbaijan, as a non-chairing country, played a key role in consolidating our efforts within movement towards combating this pandemic. We managed to transform pandemic-related challenges into cooperation opportunities.
The Non-Aligned Movement, or NAM, is seeking to further assert itself more on global issues. The week-long deliberations here are expected to conclude with the adoption of the Kampala Final Outcome document and a declaration on the crisis in Gaza. There's been a collective condemnation of the violence in which more than 23,000 people have died and thousands of others displaced.
Africa condemns this unacceptable moral, legal and humanitarian failure and demands an immediate end to the unjust war against the Palestinian people and for the immediate implementation of the two-state solution.
Uganda is taking over as the next chair of the bloc. President Yoweri Museveni has called on NAM members to define and front priorities that favor developing countries.
The strength of the non-aligned movement should be used to exercise considerable influence, particularly at the UN, for the effective transformative process for a better common future.
International peace and security, as well as dealing with humanitarian crisis, will be part of the priorities. The heads of state will conclude the summit satisfied with the growing desire from member nations to seek an equitable global governance system. The general consensus, though, has been on the Israel-Palestine crisis, with a call for an immediate ceasefire. Leon Sanyange, SABC News, Kampala, Uganda.
We shift our focus to this story now. The Directorate for Priority Crime Investigations, or the Hawks, have confirmed an investigation into Phala Phala buffalo buyer Hasim Mustafa following a complaint laid by the South African Revenue Service. SARS has opened a criminal case against Mustafa. President Cyril Ramaphosa has previously told various investigators that the man handed $580,000 in cash to his farm manager in December of 2019. To discuss this further, we're joined by Etienne Retief. He's chairperson of the SABC Center of Tax Excellence. Etienne, good afternoon and thank you for your time.
Good afternoon.
Now, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Now, this matter dates back to April 2023. We understand now this is when the case was lodged against Hasim Mustafa, but it has since now been transferred to the Hawks. What exactly does this transfer mean to the ordinary man? Have they escalated this investigation now? Can you take us through that?
Yeah. Well, obviously the details is not too clear because there's only so much information that is available. So SARS is a revenue collection authority. So they can essentially, their focus is the collection of taxes. But at the same time, when any criminal action is detected, they hand the matter over to the relevant authority. And this is what's essentially happened here, because SARS is not empowered to take action from a criminal point of view.
Mm-hmm. So when one were to craft a charge here, if we're looking at what they would have brought to the SAPS in Brooklyn at the time, at that point, when one crafts the charges, is it the failure to declare, or that would have been the allegation at the first instance when the matter was brought to the SAPS's attention?
Well, there might be more than one issue than just the failure of the declaration, because there's questions as well as to when the declaration was made. There was documentation supposedly provided or supposedly in place that shows the declaration was done. Now, perhaps that documentation is a question whether or not that was legitimate, or whether perhaps there is an element of fraud. We don't know those details as yet, but any of these kind of issues could have potentially caused for the matter to be escalated.
Now, insofar as the possibility of having some sort of fraud pertaining to that certificate, how easy is it for one to forge the certificate in any way?
Look, anything that is paper-based could be duplicated. These days, technology and a person with basic computer skills could pretty much replicate anything. And that's why we've moved so much away from, even if we look at things like the traditional tax clearance certificate that was a piece of paper, we've moved away to a PIN system so that it can be validated, because of exactly this. It's so easy to be able to duplicate a paper-based document.
Now, this particular matter has garnered a lot of public attention, and there is the difficulty that when it comes to tax matters, they are also not allowed to speak a lot, even if there are cases that have some legal challenges to them. It's very difficult to get all the details. But when looking at this matter, politicians have spoken out and they've said not only would SARS need to pursue the person who perhaps failed to declare or presented them with a fraudulent letter, but also you need to pursue the person who accepts this particular money, that onus is on them as well, on the other side, when they accept foreign currency, to ensure that there's documentation. Your views on just that?
Well, so if we look at it from that point, we have exchange control in place. So, and it's exactly that. When I receive, so on the one part is I bring currency into the country, there's a declaration requirement. And the second is when I receive foreign currency, I can't just hold foreign currency in that nature. I have certain obligations to fulfill in terms of the exchange control. So, and that might very well then be a problem. Now, we know that late last year, there was the investigation supposedly cleared, saying that there was no wrongdoing, but it was more to the point of whether or not the contract was completed and in such a state of where that money could be seen as form of payment. But any kind of exchange control contravention from either the person making the payment or the person receiving the payment is a potential issue. There's the if documentation was manipulated or fraudulently done, that's a separate criminal matter. If false declarations were being made, that's a different matter. Now, SARS, remember, is a revenue authority, so their power is to take the information they've got strict confidentiality obligations, and they've got to assess that to ensure that the correct taxes are being collected. Now, when they become aware that there is more to it than just a tax issue, then they have an obligation to escalate the matter, and this is what likely has happened here. So there's essentially two channels. The one is pursuing the correct tax outcome, and the other is making aware the authorities of a criminal matter that now needs to be investigated and the case formed by the relevant authorities. Because remember, SARS is not the relevant authority that has to investigate and make this case now. This now lies with essentially the prosecuting authority to deal with this.
So for those that possibly say there should be more arrests that are affected insofar as this case is concerned, or more people to be investigated, you would say that that is not within the ambit of SARS in this instance, that if ever there were SARS officials that they believe should be disciplined, all of this will be revealed in the investigations as to whether they should be pursuing other people.
Correct. So what's happened here is SARS clearly has knowledge of a matter that they have now reported, which from a legal point now allows that the correct authority continues now with their investigation and collection of evidence and essentially forming the necessary charges. So that authority is now the authority that makes the decisions as to who gets arrested, what charges are being brought forward, how it gets prosecuted. SARS is purely a revenue authority. So it's done and its function, it could still, and if there's any tax consequence, it can still pursue those while a prosecuting authority is going after criminal matters. So the two don't interfere with each other. They run side by side as separate issues. So yes, it doesn't sit with SARS. And my view would be that hopefully when this is investigated, every person that is a party to this who has a hand in breaking the law gets taken to task, because that is what's necessary for us to have a good judicial system.
The question of jurisdiction is one that many have posed, that here you're dealing with a situation that involves a man who's not in the country. How easy or difficult would it be for our law enforcement to actually conclude such a matter in this instance and even bring him to South Africa?
Well, so the first thing is that, yes, he might not be here at the moment, but that circumstance could change. There's also, it depends on which country, because there are political structures in place that allow for us to perhaps have him brought back to South Africa. If it's a tax-related matter, we have connections with multiple countries, which allows for the collection and assistance in collection of taxes. So there are means to deal with that. And I mean, we've seen cases like that before. Just cast your mind back to cases that we've had before, like murder cases and that, where the person actually is brought back to South Africa for purposes of prosecution. It makes it difficult because it's extra requirements that have to be met, but it's not impossible. And let's not also forget that at the end of the day, any tie they have to South Africa or connection they have in South Africa or assets still remaining here are also still things that can be attached, avenues that can be pursued.
And then insofar as minimum sentence, should one be found guilty of failing to declare or producing fraudulent documents, what would be the minimum sentence here?
It's difficult to say. I mean, this is obviously up to the courts to make that decision. We don't have, or myself, I don't have enough information about what those charges are to be able to give you an informed answer to that. Because, for instance, like a false declaration has a very different potential outcome from that of fraud, of falsifying official documentation. Which we don't know if that's the case either, or if this is a failure to declare, for instance, a foreign currency, which is now a contravention of exchange control, that has its own guidelines for prosecution. So it's difficult for me to speculate on what that could be without really understanding what the charges are that are being brought.
But it's most certainly a very interesting case. Etienne, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. That's Etienne Retief, chairperson of SAPA Centre of Tax Excellence. More news on the other side of this break. Do stay with us. Welcome back. Now, overcrowding, late registration and long queues was some of the sticking points that stood out as learners went back. Actually, the exact amount being 13 million learners returned to classrooms on the first day of the 2024 school year. Basic Education Minister Enje Motshekga visited several schools in Ga-Rankuwa, north of Pretoria. This was to monitor the reopening of schools for the new academic year. Motshekga, who was joined by Gauteng Premier Panyaza Lesufi, as well as Gauteng Education MEC Madume Chulwane, reflected on the challenges of overcrowding and learner placement problems. She also spoke on her department's readiness for the release of the Matric results.
The scenes that played themselves out in many schools across the province. This school has a capacity of 2,000, but is overcrowded at close to 2,400 pupils. Last year, the Education Department promised to give the school more funds to increase the number of classes, but it's simply too little to accommodate the growing number of pupils desperate for space at the school.
We are frustrated. We don't know how to use the online system. We also don't have jobs, so we don't have the money to buy data.
I came from the rural area, so I need to live with my children. But the school is telling me about online. I'm old. I don't even know how to do those things.
I'm a foreign. I don't have an ID. I don't have anything. When you go to register, I say, dear, you don't want foreign. What can I do? South Africa is supposed to give us papers.
In the heart of a growing township, The school has too little space for the sheer number of pupils desperate to get in.
We've kind of learned to take it in our stride. It's an ongoing thing. It's a very densely populated area. First of all, lots of people migrating into the suburb and so on. So it can be very frustrating. I mean, we'd like to start off as smoothly as most other schools, but that's never been the case in Cosmos City, unfortunately.
Gauteng Education MEC Matume Chilawane is looking into the learner placement issue. He says over 276,000 online applicants have been placed in various schools in the province.
We also continue to appeal to parents to work with us on this matter. But obviously, we do have high pressure areas because of the massive residential development that has been taking place. And largely, I repeat again, local government has not really come to the party with this, as they approve these massive developments and not consider schooling as spaces as well. So that has put pressure on us.
Speaking at the reopening of a newly renovated secondary school in Garankuwa, north of Pretoria, the Education Minister says they are ready for the 2024 school year.
I want us to look at teenage pregnancy. I want us to look at violence and bullying, but I also want us to look at just the well-being of our learners, so that if they have difficulties, we should support them. The well-being of our teachers, also to see if we can support them.
She says the growth of the country's economy depends on technical skills that can be obtained in colleges.
The world of work is changing rapidly. And that's why we are working on ICT centers, we're working on diversified skills, and can assure you that we have already introduced a number of different courses compared to our academic curriculum.
Despite the general smooth running on the first day of school, capacity remains a problem, with learner placement issues and ongoing frustration. Nozintombi Mia, SABC News.
Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa has attributed the improvement in the 2023 Matric pass rate to the phenomenal commitment of teachers and learners. On Thursday, the Basic Education Minister, Nzimotshekga, announced that the class of 2023 had achieved an 82.9% pass rate. It marks a significant increase of 2.8% points from the previous year's 80.1%. Ramaphosa says this is an indication that the country's quality of education has improved.
Well, I'm delighted with the 2023 matriculants. They have made us proud as a nation, and I guess they've also made themselves proud. This is a historic achievement ever since the dawn of democracy in our country, and indeed in the history of South Africa. To have so many young people who have done extremely well, and I applaud them for doing so well on many counters, in terms of getting distinctions, of bachelor pass rates, the improvement of the entire system, where we've been seeing it going up and up to achieve an 82.9% pass rate for matriculants, whether they are for bachelor's, diploma or matric certificate. It's a phenomenal achievement. And we should be proud as a nation to have a cohort of young people like them who were, if you like, in the eye of the COVID storm, when they had to learn under great difficulties and challenges. And there they are. They've shown and demonstrated their resilience, their commitment to be educated. And now we have a nice problem of getting them into college and into university. It's a very nice problem to have, but it is a problem which the country must shoulder, because we must educate those young people, and finally we must also make sure that they get jobs. So congratulations to the class of 2023.
All right, now for more on this, we're now joined by Umalusi's spokesperson, Biki Lipota. Mr. Lipota, good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good afternoon to you, ma'am, and good afternoon to the viewers of your TV station. Thank you for the opportunity.
No, it's a pleasure to have you with us. So the results have been released. Many very impressed with the improvements of the young ones, and we believe that there were no systemic challenges that posed a risk to the integrity of those results. How did you achieve this?
Well, that's correct. As Umalusi, we continue to congratulate all the learners who made it, and we thank everybody who contributed to where we are as a country, beginning with the learners themselves, their parents, their guardians, the teachers who taught them throughout the year, and those who are involved in the whole examination system. All the stakeholders are congratulated for the achievements that the country has seen so far. There were no systemic irregularities, yes, as we reported in our approval statement, which could have compromised the overall integrity of the results. There were some cases of group copying detected in some of our provinces, but those cases have been finalized as we speak. But what is encouraging is that if you look at the numbers this year compared to the previous year, the numbers have drastically gone down, which signals that the systems that the relevant assessment bodies have put in place are indeed working. So we are encouraged by that, but at the same time we are saying, as Umalusi, our overall goal is to see a system of examinations where cases of group copying are not in existence.
Can you just break down the data for us insofar as the group copying is concerned? Was it mostly in Mpumalanga, KZN? Which provinces were most affected by this?
Well, as we speak, the numbers that have been submitted to us are 945, with KwaZulu-Natal accounting for the majority of those and followed by Mpumalanga. The other provinces are isolated numbers, Limpopo and the Northwest. But as we say, the final reports will tell us whether the numbers have gone down or have stayed the same, or whether they have gone up. So that is where we are in terms of the statistics that we have received. We hope that they don't go up.
Now, insofar as detecting that group copying, was it an instance where it would have been most of the children answering in the same way, even with the wrong answer being answered the same way?
Yes, indeed. Those are some of the signals that were picked up during the marking process, where learners are giving same answers. Even where the answers are wrong, they are the same wrong answer. So that is a signal to the investigative markers that something went wrong here. Hence, the investigations are ongoing.
You say the investigations are ongoing. When exactly do you expect to conclude?
Well, I cannot give a definitive deadline, but as we speak, the results of those learners implicated have been blocked. As Umalusi, we have given a directive to all the assessment bodies in terms of when to come back to Umalusi to report back about the issues that were highlighted in the report that Umalusi submitted. The 15th of March is the final date by which all assessment bodies should have come back to Umalusi. But the issue of the group learners implicated in group copying, hopefully the department will be able to finalize it sooner than that.
Now, there were other challenges that were brought to many's attention around certain questions, be it the maths paper and other questions where the question would have been framed in a way that didn't allow the students to actually answer. They struggled with that. What is the situation around those type of issues?
Yes, indeed, in about 4 or 5 subjects, issues of those nature were highlighted. I can just highlight geography, where the translation from the English language into Afrikaans resulted in a question worth 2 marks being affected, where a wrong concept in the Afrikaans language was used. And in cases of this nature, what normally happens during the marking process is that those prometric questions are excluded from the marking. So if the question paper is out of 300 marks and the question under discussion is out of 2 marks, that means the whole exam will be marked out of 298, so that no learner gets disadvantaged unfairly. So that's how we normally deal with questions of that nature.
That's most certainly heartening, of course. But what do you plan to do in future to ensure there are no such instances? Because it does lend itself, or it does create a situation where you've got a learner who then in that moment is stuck on a specific question for a longer time than they would have, and that in essence compromises their whole ability to finish on time. So it may seem like it's one question, but it does have a significant impact if a learner is not sure that the question is framed incorrectly and they spend too much time on that particular question.
That is indeed so. That is why, as Umalusi, we keep on, during our quarterly meetings with all the assessment bodies, saying what are we doing to prevent issues of this nature recurring going into the future. That's why in the directive that we've issued, we said come back to us by the 15th of March in terms of the plans which you will put in place to avoid the recurrence of these issues. And one of those issues that we have asked the assessment bodies to invest time in is training of the people who set the question papers, as well as the people who do what we call internal moderation. And on the side of Umalusi, the same thing happens because we have our annual reflection meetings to say how did the examinations this year fare in relationship with the previous examination sessions, and what issues were picked up, and how best can we ensure that going forward learners do not get impacted upon by issues of this nature. So we are working on these issues.
Because for many it would seem very negligible. It's just but one error. But when you look at it broadly, it does compromise most of these learners. But thank you very much for your time this afternoon, and congratulations for those results. That was Umaliso spokesperson Biki Lipota. More news on the other side of this break. Stay with us. The World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland has concluded. Brand South Africa says the aim of South Africa's participation at the Conference of Global Leaders in Politics, Business and Academia and Civil Society was to shift the mindset of investors from uncertainty to confidence. Acting Brand SA CEO Stembile Ntombela told SABC News that transparency topped the agenda for South Africa going into Davos. The aim was to acknowledge the challenges the country is facing and assure investors of interventions to overcome these difficulties.
The local economy is battling structural challenges such as the electricity supply constraints and logistics inefficiencies that are hindering business activity and dampening investor confidence. Brand SA says this situation is not unique to South Africa. Following the war in Ukraine, Europe also experienced an energy crisis. The organization says with 2024 being an election year in South Africa, investors also want to know what to expect on the political front.
They've been asking about the energy crisis, what are we doing about it? But they also understand that it's a situation, or rather a challenge that is not peculiar to South Africa, as I've said, because as we've seen the implication coming from the Russia and Ukraine perspective. So thus far, the question that has really come up has been around logistics, has been around energy. As for the rest of the economy, and another one is that as we go towards the election year, what do we envisage from a political perspective? There's that, there are many other countries like your US, I think India as well, they're all going for elections, and investors are looking to see the volatility of these economies.
Exxaro, a player in the mining sector, says 2024 holds a promise of a better economic performance, which can happen if structural reforms are implemented and there is policy certainty.
We also expect, as I said, Eskom will really move. We've seen they've got a new CEO, so we expect stability, and then the legislation that follows, we're expecting that to come. From a Transnet perspective, it's the same thing, is really to see movement from government from a policy point of view, protecting investments that we want to make, making sure that the concessions that we've talked about with government on the rail, making sure that as the private sector, we participate meaningfully in the investments in rail, because we know the state, is really choking at the moment from a financial perspective, and we need to take responsibility. We need to take responsibility, though that is not risky to our investors.
Climate change, characterized by the extreme weather patterns, has also been a topic of interest.
We certainly borne the impact of bigger claims on, particularly from the flooding. So if you think back a couple of years ago, where we had the floods in KZN, so the two biggest weather risks that impact us are the flooding and the hail. So hail damage and flood damage are the two big ones. And all we've seen is an increase in claims in the year where the weather's been really bad. And the question we're starting to have to ask ourselves is, is that a cyclical thing, which is normal, or are you starting to say, well, actually you have to increase prices because it's just going to cost more through the cycle? And then but the world is thinking about this, and the reinsurers that we share the risk with, that we take on, are also all thinking about this. So there's a lot of very technical work going on around forecasting the impact of weather systems and what that's going to do to claim severity in the future.
Investors have also been concerned about the geopolitical uncertainty globally that is threatening supply chains. Gloria Sefakomosi, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Credit rating agency Fitch has maintained South Africa's credit rating at sub-investment grade of BB- with a stable outlook. Now, according to Fitch, South Africa's credit rating was constrained by low real GDP growth, high level of inequality and rising government debt to GDP ratio, among others. Now, growth for the country is also said to be hampered by power shortages and the country's struggling logistics sector. The credit ratings agency estimates that load shedding will reduce in intensity in 2024 and 2025, but will not disappear, with more capacity expected to come from private sector investments. Government says it notes Fitch's decision and is implementing the necessary reforms to be at investment grade. This includes raising GDP growth by improving the provision of electricity and logistics and enhancing the delivery infrastructure. The European Union's ban on Russia diamonds kicked in at the start of January, preventing their sale of European markets. Beyond Russia, though, experts say the move could have a seismic impact on markets around the world, including Africa. Alex Kedier reports from Antwerp, Belgium.
They say diamonds are forever, but that's not the case for Russian diamonds in the EU. In its latest round of sanctions against Moscow, the bloc has banned the purchase of natural or synthetic diamonds from Russia, as well as jewellery made from the precious stones across its 27 member states. Russia is responsible for mining 30% of the world's diamonds. The EU and G7 countries between them represent well over 70% of the global market for purchasing polished diamonds. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has previously been critical of the industry in Europe, including in an address to the Belgian parliament a month after Russian troops rolled into his country.
We are fighting against tyranny that seeks to divide Europe, that wants to destroy those who value freedom. But there are some in Europe for whom Russian diamonds, sometimes sold in Antwerp, are more important than freedom.
Nearly 2 years later, Europe has listened. One of the major consequences of this ban may be that diamonds destined for the European Union will come through here, in the Belgian city of Antwerp. Their origin will be verified to make sure no Russian diamonds are making it through. But far from Russia's invasion of Ukraine and European sanctions, there are fears that this ban could have negative knock-on effects for other miners and producers around the world. The head of the Kimberley process, a certification scheme created to avoid conflict diamonds being sold on the global market, has warned the ban could do irreparable harm to African producers. The EU's requirement to declare origins and the need for exporters to fill out declarations could add costs to African diamond operations, indirectly punishing them for Russia's actions. But industry experts say short-term pain could turn into long-term gain.
As with any innovation, there's always some initial uncertainty on how will this impact our business. On the other side, it's also a great opportunity for African countries to really promote their origin and tell all the beautiful stories about what they do for the surrounding communities.
And while there could be significant upheaval for Africa's diamond industry, all of this may not impact their profit margins.
African countries, I just did the calculations, I don't expect a big change as such. Why? Because these countries, if you take Lesotho for instance, they are not mixing diamonds. They are only selling their run-of-mines, and the run-of-mine goes to the trading hubs. The diamonds will travel differently now. So from the African nations where the diamonds used to travel first to Dubai, yes, and probably they will come first to Antwerp now.
The global impact of this ban will likely take months to become clear. At best, it could present a sparkling opportunity for Africa's diamond industry. At worst, it could become collateral damage from Russia's invasion. Alex Kadier, SABC News, Antwerp.
And that's where we leave it for today. We're back tomorrow. Enjoy your afternoon further.